What is it that makes us afraid of the dark? Does the supernatural exist outside of the imagination? If we experience something that is not possible, is our experience false? Or are the boundaries of reality more vast than science can currently explain? Something happened to me. Something that would change my perception of reality forever. Something that would lead me on a journey around the world, possessing my imagination, leading me deeper and deeper into the spirit world. Some revelations come in murmured whispers in the wind. Others come like a lightning bolt in the night. This film began at 3:15 a.m. on November the 3rd, 2005. I have not slept with the lights off since. Some nights, I can't sleep at all, for fear it will return.
I woke up and it was, I don't know, about 3 or 4 in the morning. And I looked over and you were completely rigid in the bed, staring at the ceiling, and your eyes were open and you were trying to scream, or it looked as if you were trying to scream, because I could hear this moaning coming through your gritted teeth. And I leaned over and grabbed your arm and you woke up. You were terrified and you kept asking me if I saw her.
What was she? The words that came to my mind seemed foolish. Ghost, entity, demon, witch. Yet only these words seemed to convey what this thing might have been. I wondered if I was losing my mind. A deep-rooted fascination took hold of me. I was surprised to learn that my uncle had experienced something strikingly similar.
What I could remember, besides darkness and dread, were eyes that were brilliantly green. Not attractively green, but awfully green. As almost like a signature. The only thing that was definable to me, physically definable, about that, and it was fleeting. It was right at the very end, as if to say that I have been seen and I have seen what this presence was.
I knew that if my uncle had had this experience, others might have as well. I was about to embark on a journey that would forever blur the line between the physical world and the other realm. Scientists call the phenomena a hallucination, encountered during sleep paralysis. 1 in 5 will experience this at least once in their lifetime. It is believed to be the phenomenon that gave birth to the legend of the vampire, succubus, shapeshifters, and some say all belief in the supernatural.
It stands alone in the pantheon of sleep disorders or sleep phenomena. There's something uniquely horrifying about it.
Initially, it's almost inevitably viewed as threatening evil in nature.
This is absolute abject terror, and people will often go on and try to somehow find just the right words to convince you and give you a sense of just how terrified. More terrifying than anything I have experienced in real life.
It is perhaps one of the oldest and greatest unexplained mysteries of the human mind. It has inspired countless Gothic horror stories. This is not a dream. The victim is awake, completely paralyzed and fully aware that what is happening to them is not possible. Yet, they can see it as it enters the room, hear it shuffling as it moves towards the bed, feel its bones as it climbs onto their chest, and smell its breath as it stares into their eyes. The entity is known by many names around the world. In Newfoundland, it is known as the hag.
It was the worst experience I've ever had, and I'm just beat out. My heart's pounding, and I'm not going back in that room, right? It was crazy.
In Japan, it is known as kanishibari.
I felt the evilness of that entity, and I thought, if this went on, maybe I would die. Yeah.
In Zanzibar, it is called the Popabawa.
But it appears to have started in the south of Pemba and then spread from village to village. So they'd be asleep in bed. For whatever reason, they'd wake up, they'd be awoken, and they'd be faced with some sort of entity.
In Vietnam, it is known as the Dao Cho.
They call this the sudden, unexpected nocturnal death syndrome. There was no clear cause of death. The people went to sleep apparently healthy, and at some point in the night, and it was always the night, died.
I began a journey. It would last for 2 years and take me into the heart of darkness. Sleep paralysis has been known by many other names throughout the centuries. In pagan Europe, a demonic shape-shifting entity called the Mara, or Night Mara, meaning the crusher that comes in the night, attacked people in their sleep, paralyzing them as it climbed onto their chest, feeding on their souls. It is believed that the first Night Mara was Lilith, the disgruntled first wife of Adam, who was banished to make room for Eve. Lilith revenged herself by crushing and sexually assaulting men in their sleep. In Rome, there were well-documented epidemics of succubus attacks. During the Salem witch trials, women believed to be responsible for conjuring the Night Mara were executed. In Rhode Island, in the 19th century, bodies of the dead were exhumed in the night, their hearts cut out and burned in a desperate attempt to stop an outbreak. Eventually, the Night Mara became the Nightmare. Lost with the original meaning of the name was our ability to identify the phenomena. However, in some isolated cultures that have retained ancient knowledge and belief in the supernatural world, the Night Mara remains common knowledge. I knew it would be in these places, if anywhere, that I might find answers. My journey began in Newfoundland. It was here the phenomena was first identified by modern science nearly 30 years ago. In Newfoundland, the Night Mara is known as the hag. Newfoundlanders have been suffering attacks of the hag for more than 300 years. The hag, according to Newfoundland lore, is a supernatural witch who attacks sleepers at night, paralyzing her victims as she crawls onto their chest, suffocating, smothering, and choking them. Like in many other cultures, it is believed that the hag attack is potentially fatal if the victim is not awakened from their paralytic trance.
Some people describe it as being like a ghost. Some people think that it's a demon. Some people think that it's being done by someone who has that power, a hag, that is witchcraft, which is where the word hag comes from. It's an old English term that just means witch. So sort of all of the above are possibilities within the Newfoundland tradition.
The island's sparse population of 300,000 is spread over 1,300 small settlements along its massive 6,000-mile coastline. The extreme isolation of these small fishing villages and lumber camps allowed them to maintain their traditional culture and beliefs with little influence from the outside world.
I would say most people would describe it as, yeah, probably as a witch
that
or
sits on your chest or kneels on you.
Yeah. You know, and you know, people would totally know that it's something that comes in your sleep, and you know, it gives you that feeling of being trapped and not being able to move.
So I saw her walk into the room, and she, like I said, I was lying on my stomach, and she reached down and she grabbed my ankle.
Crawls up the wall onto the ceiling, and then lowers itself down over me upside down.
The image, if I did see that, you know, this old woman, she'd just be this old haggard woman with gray hair and long nails. And
she got herself all curled up, and then she stretched herself right out on the bed next to me on her stomach.
And I was kind of sunk into the bed. It was just crazy. And I just look to the left and the right, and I look up, and the face is still there.
It feels like it's thirsty. It's drinking something from me.
You know, being completely aware of just feeling like I was awake, but looking at my hand and not being able to move my hand.
Turns its head around, and it looks me right in the face, and it starts to breathe in my air.
I was so scared, knowing that there was this thing next to me, and I was thinking, like, I can't even imagine how horrible this thing or this creature is if I turn around.
And like, literally about a year later, I actually sold the house.
In 1982, a breakthrough sociological study was published about the Newfoundland hag syndrome, proving that the hag attacks occurred regardless of cultural influence. The author of this study was Dr. David Hufford, who is now considered one of the world's leading authorities on the topic.
So I was looking for beliefs about which people would say, we believe these things because we have experienced them. One of the first traditions I encountered in Newfoundland that was true of was the old hag. About a quarter of those who said it had happened to them said they had not heard of it happening to anyone else, they didn't know a name for it, and they couldn't define the old hag accurately. It makes you have to ask, well, where are these experiences coming from? If they're not coming from culture, where are they coming from?
It's not something out there that's causing this. It's just a part of the physiology of that state.
Dr. Alan Shane at the University of Waterloo has been conducting an in-depth survey of sleep paralysis experiences for more than 10 years. This online survey has been completed by 50,000 people from around the world. Shane is a materialist who believes that the entities encountered during episodes of sleep paralysis are hallucinations.
Some people don't like calling them hallucinations because they think it kind of prejudges what they really are, but technically they fit the definition of what a hallucination is.
Sleep paralysis is believed to be a unique malfunction in the human operating system that can be brought on by stress and exhaustion. It is thought that we are naturally paralyzed during sleep so that we don't physically act out our dreams and harm ourselves.
During sleep paralysis, unlike normal dreaming, you're awake. You know you're paralyzed, you know you can't move, you can't breathe, You're alone, or the person with you is sleeping, so there's no help. So you have this situation, which is just intrinsically in itself frightening.
The fear and threat centers in our brain are triggered, and our minds attempt to find the danger. In the absence of any real danger, we are left with a sense of an ominous entity lurking nearby.
Somebody or something in the room, you just feel it, and then you have sort of sensory experiences that tend to confirm that. You see things, hear things, and so on. So it's all, those experiences are about something out there. So it's about the other, if you will.
Although we are awake, we may be dreaming at the same time, creating an altered state of consciousness.
It's not something out there that's causing this. It's just part of the physiology of that state.
Could a hallucination seem so real? Was my mind capable of creating something so terrifying? While Western scientists have spent a few decades studying this phenomena, the Japanese have been aware of it for thousands of years. I traveled to Japan to speak with those who had encountered the Kanishibari. While Japan is one of the most modern and technologically advanced countries in the world, it is also a place of great spiritual awareness. Shinto and Buddhist temples can be found on most street corners, and it is believed by most Japanese that spirit beings dwell around us at all times.
In the middle of the night, I suddenly found out that something or someone was upon me on my bed. Every time I tried to get up, he pushed me down, and I couldn't move an inch. So, and I couldn't cry for help because somehow my voice didn't come. Felt that the thing tried to absorb my strength. I even felt the face of the thing just in front of me. And still I was completely awakened. So I don't think any scientific explanation explaining that kind of fear.
She was lying on bed, and then just all of a sudden she felt something oppressing her body, and then she couldn't move. She looked at her feet, and then she saw something in shadow. She felt somebody was squeezing her neck. The next morning, her mom told her that she was experiencing the same thing.
If this is a sleep disorder, could a mother and daughter experience it in the same night, though neither had before or since? Even though the medical term sleep paralysis is well known here, these entities are widely believed to be the spirits of the dead. The most feared of these spirits is the Kanishibari.
When I woke up, the light was on and the door was open just a little bit. And then like someone was staring at me from that closet.
I couldn't move and I couldn't say anything.
I couldn't open my eyes because I was so scared. First I thought it was a human, but then I realized it's not a human.
I was not sure it was a ghost, but I felt probably ghost was on top of myself.
He just watching me and smiled, and after that he squeezed my neck and he just smiling. I was so scared. The face changing into my father's face. Then finally my father, I'm sorry, my father smiling. after that, I never experienced kanashibari.
Although some believe these entities are hallucinations, the spiritual and psychological effects they have on their victims are profoundly real.
So it's the weight on the chest, it's the smothering, it's the feeling that something has its hands around your neck and is choking you. People think that they really are in danger of dying. They're really afraid that they might die because they can't breathe, they can't move, they can't cry out. What's happening? I'm suffocating. And sometimes it actually feels like they're being smothered.
Not just fear, but horror in the sense that it's revulsion. I shrink from that presence in the room. I am repelled by it.
They were so terrifying in nature, so traumatic in nature, that they would go on to develop brain changes similar to those that we see in post-traumatic stress disorder.
What would happen on the next leg of my journey, no rational theory could explain. While some believe that the hag and kanishibari are waking hallucinations, the Popobawa epidemic that swept numerous times across the African island of Zanzibar defies explanation. Zanzibar is a small island off the coast of Tanzania. It rose to prominence as an international slaving port that has been ruled over the centuries by the Portuguese, Arabs, and British. Finally, after a violent and bloody revolution in 1964, Zanzibar became a part of the United Republic of Tanzania. Though the island is predominantly Muslim, there is a long tradition of witchcraft and African tribal religion that are still actively practiced today. In Zanzibar, the supernatural crosses over into the physical world in ways that seem unfathomable. Zanzibar was like no other place I had ever been, a city filled with ghosts of past empires, slavery, and revolution. Some say it was the collective memory of centuries of slavery suffered on the island, from which the Popobawa first rose. Others believe it was the work of black magic. The attacks began in 1970, shortly after the revolution that left thousands dead. It erupted again in 1995, and once more in 2007. Massive numbers of Zanzibarians were attacked by the Popobawa each night, bringing entire communities into a state of hysteria. It spread through Zanzibar like a plague. The citizens became so terrified that they began to sleep in large groups outdoors for safety.
The flowing of the stories about the Popobawa was growing more and more, every day. And now I hear the screams. It was in the late night when I was in bed sleeping. Then I started to tremor a bit that the Popobawa he will be here very soon.
Though I traveled for 3 days without sleep to get here, I lay awake till dawn, too afraid to close my eyes. I felt a malevolent presence around me. I've come here to meet with renowned anthropologist Dr. Martin Walsh of Cambridge University. Walsh was here in '95 when the attacks began. He was one of the first to make the connection between the Popobawa and sleep paralysis.
Personally, I think when we ascribe things to the supernatural, it's like, to me, an admission of failure, that saying we can't explain them. I prefer to think that we can.
We traveled to the slums of Zanzibar town to meet with a witch doctor who specializes in spirit possession and exorcism. It was going to be an interesting start.
Ni mtu mwenyewe nageuka au ni kitu ambacho kanaleta kama...
Ushanifahamu? Ismu ya Popobawa iko Pemba.
Popobawa is a type of, if you like, a genie or a spirit. And it's something that people themselves bring. And people themselves bring upon other people. And it does harm to them and causes pain to them.
Wahapa.
The thing that Popobawa does is have anal intercourse with men and also women in the form of a spirit. Yalipatikana na nani? Mefam. Kitu gani? So what was it that happened to you?
One night I awoke and I could sense that there was something evil in the room. I tried to move and found that I couldn't move, that I was paralyzed. I tried to scream and I couldn't scream. I just like... And I could open my eyes and only move my eyes. And I could see an entity or spirit at the foot of my bed that had a white shroud, and as it raised its arm, I could feel myself or my soul being sucked out of my body, or like a forced out-of-body experience. Just and my wife awoke, and she turned around and she shook me, and when she shook me, it was gone. The witch doctor told me that I had been possessed by a spirit that he could only exorcise by performing an ancient symbolic ritual in which he would suck the evil from my body.
It's
going to take something out, so just relax.
It would be in the next part of my journey that I would be confronted by the shocking reality of the Popobawa epidemic.
Some of these incubus attacks are not only physical assaults, but they're sexual assaults as well. And in particular, women tend to report these. They will involve penetration, vaginal and anal penetration, sensations of that. So it will feel very much like a rape kind of scenario. So that seems to be the key feature of the Popobawa.
We traveled to a remote village that was attacked by the Popobawa only weeks before we arrived. During the attacks, these people remained awake for many nights, too terrified to sleep. A number of the women in this village agreed to speak with us about their encounter with the Popobawa. These women were all attacked on the same night.
Because of the fear of Popobawa, she stayed awake for 3 nights. She didn't want to sleep, because if you sleep then you're prone to attack. Long kind of black hair, and extremely long nails. It kind of came, especially to the children, and it kind of, as though it was waking them up and frightening them, it kind of came over the children. It came over and pressed her so that she was unable to shout out. 3 times, and three different occasions, Popo Bao came and attacked her together with her children. It would be holding her, it would be up on the wall, and she showed very graphically the way it covered the body and so on. But it did sexually assault her.
In front of the children?
Well, they were all together with the children at that time, yeah. When it attacks you from behind, yeah, I mean, it's a thoroughly unpleasant thing. It's as you can imagine, with kind of anal rape, that you know, afterwards it's a bit of a mess. Feces are coming out of you, and
so in this situation, she was awake, and more than, she wasn't the only one to see it.
Yeah, hata watoto waliona vizuri. Yeah.
I didn't want to believe these women. The implications were too terrifying.
There's talk of the forces of evil in ancient literature and in different spiritual writings. It's not just something that exists in human consciousness.
It has aspects that if they are not somehow a mistake, somehow a hallucination, then they are some sort of perception of a spiritual reality.
There must be some other explanation that is beyond, you know, science that is accounting for these events.
Could a hallucination be perceived by multiple people? Could it cause physical injuries? The fear inside me began to grow. In Zanzibar, spirit possession is common. Many people have guardian spirits or possessing spirits that are always with them, helping to guide them through life. This dancer is entering a possessed state as he performs this traditional spirit calling ceremony. Very little is understood about possession, except that those who are experiencing it enter an altered state of consciousness between the waking and dream state. Their minds appear to be taken over by an external personality or spirit. During the Popobawa outbreaks, many people were possessed by their guardian spirits who screamed warnings of the Popobawa's presence.
Wamevaa mambo ya ajabu ajabu. Ushanielewa?
Kama wewe uko usingizi.
Mimi nimelala kabisa.
It was doing those things to people that we heard, harassing in different ways, maybe assaulting them sexually or in unusual ways that people are not used to hearing about.
Like the early Newfoundlanders, Zanzibarians quickly came to the conclusion that the Popobawa was the work of witchcraft. As the Europeans and early settlers of Salem did, Zanzibarians burned and murdered suspected witches.
There was somebody in Pemba from a village called Vitongoji who it was thought was maybe responsible for these things. And he was found together with various kind of items associated with witchcraft, particular magical substances, strange things, fingernails, bits of foreskins that have been taken from circumcised children, What happened to him is taken by the government. People are not sure. He's kind of disappeared off the record. One person, or one Popo Bauer, was burned to death. And he says at both times when those killings took place, in '95 and again more recently in early 2007, the episodes came to an end. The killing of those particular manifestations of Popo Bauer in some way was related to the ending of those particular episodes.
I had read about these mob killings, but now the reality hit home. The community was so gripped by fear, they resorted to murder to stop the epidemic.
I think sleep paralysis is part of the story, but I think that it goes beyond sleep paralysis. The spirit possession, the frenzy of trance, the wider complex of spirit possession that fed into, that became very much part of the Popo Bauer outbreaks. I don't think you can explain that in terms of sleep paralysis.
It was, however, much closer to home that the most severe nightmare epidemic took place, leaving in its wake a trail of shattered lives. Amance Brausch is a professor of psychology at King's College. Brausch specializes in the study of consciousness and believes that altered states of consciousness may allow us to perceive things that are normally beyond the ability of our waking minds.
The ordinary waking state is considered a pathological state. It's a state in which we don't see things the way they really are. Sensory modalities only pick up such a tiny sliver of what is physically here. And there could be all other things which are not physical, whatever that might mean, that could also be going on that we're not aware of ordinarily.
Altered states of consciousness have been used as a means of perceiving or entering the spirit world in many cultures for thousands of years. These mental states can be achieved in different ways, such as meditation, chanting, hallucinogenic drugs, or something that seems to occur naturally, such as sleep paralysis. Recent discoveries in quantum physics strongly suggest that there are, in fact, multiple dimensions of reality, and that it is possible that we can suddenly perceive and interact within these non-material dimensions by altering the way our minds work.
Maybe your brain can be reset in some altered states of consciousness, so that perceptions that are otherwise not possible become possible.
In 1980, a frightening pattern of unexplained deaths was brought to the attention of the American Center of Disease Control. Since the beginning of the outbreak in 1977, more than 100 deaths have been ascribed to sudden, unexplained nocturnal death syndrome. The victims of this epidemic were the Hmong refugees who had fled to the United States after the end of the Vietnam War. The Hmong called the outbreak nightmare death.
The people that I spoke to themselves felt that a spirit was coming and attacking these people, that a spirit would come and threaten you once or twice, and then if you didn't do what you were supposed to, traditionally, you were at risk for losing your life.
The Hmong culture dates back beyond recorded history. They are a deeply spiritual people who believe that the spirit world is all around us and is as real as the physical world that our bodies inhabit. The Hmong believe their health and life depend on appeasing the spirit world through ritual ceremony and sacrifice. Practicing their religious ceremonies in the United States was an impossibility in small, crowded city apartments. Without spiritual protection, the Hmong began to be plagued by mysterious nocturnal death. The Hmong believe the Tao Cho or nightmare, was responsible for the deaths. Medical anthropologist Dr. Shelley Adler came to agree with them.
The more we find out about the placebo phenomenon, the idea that expecting a good positive outcome can help bring that about, the more it seems to make sense that there's also a nocebo phenomenon, that the more you expect a terrible outcome, the more that might come about.
The idea of being scared to death is not a new one. Anyone, if terrified enough, can suffer heart failure. It is common for those who experience the nightmare to feel they might die, but for the Hmong, this fear became a reality.
I think it's entirely plausible that people can be frightened to death.
Our imaginations are extremely powerful, and our beliefs are extremely powerful. And if we think that that can happen to us, then it can.
When the Hmong moved out of the urban centers and into rural areas where they formed communities and could again practice their traditional ceremonies, the Dao Cho attacks and deaths stopped. I went to visit a respected Hmong shaman to have him perform the ritual that has been credited with saving the Hmong from sudden death. It was the Hmong New Year, and many families had come to pay respect to the shaman. Sacrifices were made to ensure the spirits were satisfied, and good fortune would shine in the coming year.
Yeah.
A shaman can enter an altered state of consciousness through long chanting trances. He travels into the spirit world to ward off evil spirits, ensuring the health of the souls he is attempting to save. Red cloth is tied around the wrists of his subject to form a barrier between the nightmare and the victim. Here in this room, for one terrifying moment, I experienced the same sense I'd had in my room 2 years ago, and again in Africa. Then it was gone.
The reason for that red cloth is to kind of like a fence. So when you have that, when that jaw comes to your body, it will, separate that jaw away from your own spirit, your own soul.
Although it isn't part of my tradition to understand this as evil spirits or as a supernatural or spiritual experience, it's not for me to say that it isn't that experience for somebody else.
I think now, as I thought when it happened to me, that it is somehow a real spiritual experience, that it's real and that it's spiritual, that it is an encounter of some kind. I thought that when it happened to me, as practically everyone who has it happen to them thinks it. But the more I have learned about it, the more I've seen it in other people, the more I've heard the experiences described, and the more I have found the consistencies across cultures, the stronger the grounds for believing that seem to me.
Since my visit to the shaman, I have had no more encounters with the nightmare. Perhaps I believe just enough for it to work. Perhaps it's just coincidence. Perhaps the barrier between belief and skepticism, between science and spirituality, are only those of language, hallucination versus vision, dream world versus spirit world, different words and belief systems describing the same experience. As Joseph Dunninger once said, for those who believe, no explanation is necessary. For those who do not, no explanation is possible.